Hey, what's going on, guys?
All right, guys. So welcome to another Friday with Coffee with Closers. I've got my coffee here. Got Cesar here. He's
Got
got
my
his coffee.
coffee.
Nice, nice. And we're at the offices of White Picket Realty on Washington Avenue. So today we're going to be talking about because real estate has been on the news quite a bit the last couple of days, last couple of weeks. Real estate has been on the
Yep.
news, and not just because of higher interest rates or higher home prices, but so we're going to get into it in a little bit. But first of all, Cesar,
What's going on, guys?
all right. So just to get into it, if you haven't heard on the news, real estate has been on the national news in the last couple of days. And the reason is that NAR recently settled a lawsuit. So we're going to talk briefly about what that lawsuit actually is entails and then what the reaction is with the public. So Cesar wants to tell us a little bit about what is actually doing, what the lawsuit is about.
Okay. So it is a national lawsuit, guys. So just keep in mind, every state currently has their own rules and regulations over how they perform and what they're doing and how they disclose different things to their sellers, to their buyers, to their investors. But they basically cookie cutter the lawsuit into a big nationwide thing. One of the cool things is I think in Houston and in Texas, we do things a little different, where a lot of the new requirements are already in place. Not everyone does them, but they're already in place, right? So I think one of the main things that changed is the news is portraying this as like no more buyer commissions or no more buyer's agent commissions. Sellers don't have to pay that anymore. That's the lawsuit says nothing about that. All it says is that us as real estate agents in the MLS system are not allowed to disclose if there is a commission or not for the buyer's agent. We're not allowed to advertise that, and that's the primary change that's going on. And I believe the second change is that we do have to have some kind of buyer representation agreement between us and the buyers, which here in Houston we already do.
Yeah, and you made a couple of great points. Here in Texas, we're already ahead of the game, and then we already had buyer representation agreements that spelled out exactly what our role is as an agent. We know when representing a buyer or when representing a seller. So we've already ahead of the game, and we're already putting things in place that are going to protect everyone involved,
Yep.
right? And so another thing is that, of course, the news, they love to be as scandalous as possible, right? Their job is to have attention grabbing headlines.
Mhm.
That's their job.
Yes.
And so we're talking about, the real estate industry is going to be upended. The end of buyers agents, the end of agents, the end of commissions towards agents. That is, of course, just to grab your attention. The reality is that we both see that representation is important. That you need to have representation on this side. As a listing agent yourself, why is it important for a seller to have that representation? That listing agent represent them.
Okay. So I will say I like what you were saying about news and being, you gotta have headlines, right? And I think every good story has a bad guy or an evil entity in it, right? And unfortunately, in this whole thing, the bad guy, the bad entity is the buyer's agent, right? But coming from the listing side, what's important when it comes to having a good real estate agent, and keep in mind, every single home is going to be different, right? There's no one cookie cutter way of approaching this. What's important is disclosure. So a good agent, and the importance of having a good agent is they're gonna be all about disclosure. They're gonna tell you exactly how everything works. They're gonna go through step by step to make sure that you comprehend what you're getting yourself into, what the market might look like, what negotiations might look like, and everything's gonna be set on paper, right? And then one thing I was thinking about earlier today is a good agent is going to turn this into more of a data driven process. It's going to be all about data, right? Say you're in a neighborhood, right? In a neighborhood where the majority of buyers are cash buyers. It's an older neighborhood, needs a lot of work, a lot of flippers in that neighborhood. Then at that point, if you have a lot of cash buyers, to me, you might not need to offer as much of a compensation for a buyer's agent because a lot of investors are already pretty savvy when it comes to purchasing. They can represent themselves. And at that point, you could save a little there, right? But it takes a good listing agent to explain that to you. On the opposite side, if you're in a neighborhood where 9 out of every 10 homes that sell is an FHA buyer, a first-time home buyer, a buyer that typically doesn't have extra money to pay their buyer's agent, that means that by not offering any kind of buyer's agent compensation, you're eliminating 9 out of every 10 buyers, and you're down to one buyer that might be able to buy it cash or buy it conventionally, but then your negotiation power goes away and they're going to be able to lowball you or offer way less than what you would get if you allowed some of these other buyers to be in the game as well.
You know, you brought up a couple of good points, and I think there are two different buyers, and that perhaps that the compensation should be different if you do have two different type of buyers. You have your investor who is savvy, who's going to make it so much quicker. They know exactly what they're looking for, so they're probably going to bypass some of the steps in the buying process in buying your home. They're going to do their own inspections. They're going to do their own due diligence. Whereas a first-time home buyer or a buyer who just buys a home once every 10 years, they need to go through the entire process of getting the inspections, of reviewing the inspection report, getting the appraisal, getting the survey, and reviewing that, and having someone review that with you. Now, that takes time. That takes, and then definitely takes a knowledgeable agent to be able to guide you through that.
Yep.
And so there's going to be two different types. One is a quick process with the investor who knows what they're doing. The other one's a little bit more lengthy, and neither one is wrong. I think it's just what the house is going to fetch, right? It's what is the house going to get, an investor client or a regular consumer who's buying the house for themselves, right? And so the other thing, so that kind of brings me to my next point is the why a buyer's why a client needs a buyer's rep. And the idea is that it goes beyond just finding the house and negotiating the price. At that point, you have inspection reports to go through. You have the appraisal to review. You have the survey to review. You have to negotiate if there are any repairs to be made. You have to make sure that you hit every single deadline so that you don't risk your earnest money. So it goes beyond that. And every single step of the way on there brings more details where the real estate agent is going to step in and make sure that you are protected, that you hit every single deadline. And at the end of the day, you are happy with your purchase, that you know what you bought and what you're investing in. And that gives you peace of mind. That is why a client needs a buyer's agent to represent them.
Yeah. And I think as we, you see a lot in the news and in the media of people fighting over kind of like big business, big that, like who's the bad guy, the big corporations. But this lawsuit to me, and keep in mind it's to me, what it's doing is it's also separating the income gap already, right? Because the people who are most affected by this are going to be those first-time buyers or the buyers that don't have extra money to be able to compensate their own agent. And so then you're going to have a lot less of those people buying if we allow it to get to the point where that part of the equation gets eliminated. And guess who's going to be coming in and buying? The people who have cash, the people who make more money. So at the end of the day, you're not hurting the people at the top. You're hurting the people that are like your everyday person. So in reality, nobody wins other than people who already have money and the lawyers who were part of this lawsuit.
You bring a good point. And as far as who's the one that's going to be most protected is the one who can pay for their protection, right? For that representation. If you go in there and you don't have the knowledge that someone else does, you're probably going to get bulldozed into saying, hey, that inspection report doesn't mean anything. Hey, you can fix that. Go to Home Depot and fix that, right?
Yep.
Hey, that foundation can work, right? That roof is not that old. The HVAC can still handle it. And if you don't have someone there fighting for you and saying, hey, I've seen this report before, I've seen these issues before, we need to have them addressed before you buy the house, instead of getting bulldozed into saying, hey, you know what? You want this house? Here it is. Take it as is, right? Because if you don't have someone representing you and the seller does, that agent is in the best interest of the seller, not you. They have no fiduciary responsibility to make sure that you have the best outcome. No fiduciary responsibility. You're on your own. And if you don't know, and again, most people buy a house every 10 years, while we do this on a monthly basis. And so we know exactly what to look for. Agents know exactly what to look for. Make sure that you are protected every single step of the way. So that's, what I don't see in the long run where buyers are not going to be represented. I just don't see that happening.
Neither do I.
No, I don't see it happening. And so,
and what I would say is it's gonna separate what it's gonna do for agents, right? Because we're talking about buyers and sellers. what I see it doing for agents, real estate agents, is it's going to separate the good agents from the bad agents, right? And I don't say bad in a way of they're horrible people and they're not looking out for their client's best interest. I say it in a way of just inexperience, maybe experience versus inexperience. Let's spin the words, right? What you're going to get is the inexperienced agents are going to be the ones that are probably coming in and they're going to be willing to lower their commissions a little bit or negotiate that part. And then you're going to get the experienced agents for those tough situations, those tough sell situations, and they're going to come in and probably charge a little more, right? So it opens it up where if you have experience, you're probably going to start making more as an agent. If you're not as experienced, you're going to start making a little less. So it's going to drive the gap also. So everything is just kind of pushing everything either this way or this way. There's not a lot left in the middle, right? And that's where the experience comes in. And if you have an agent, let me say this, as a buyer, you don't want to think, I don't have the money to pay an agent, right? Excuse me. I don't have the money to pay an agent. I'm not going to buy a house. I'm just going to keep renting. A good agent is going to come and figure it out for you, right? So don't lose hope. Don't feel like I don't have money for a down payment, let alone an agent, let alone everything else that it can cost. Have that first conversation, and you can tell in that conversation, is this person going to be able to help me? Are they looking out for me? Are they going to make it work? And for me, we're going to find a way to make it work.
An experienced
That's
agent,
what we do.
An experienced agent is going to make it happen for you.
Exactly.
Regardless of the market, regardless of what the lawsuit said, an experienced agent is going to make it happen for you. And it's not unlike other industries.
Nope.
If you look at other industries, it works pretty much the same way. The person with the more experience gets paid. And if we're talking to attorneys, guess what? A new attorney is probably not going to get paid as much as a more experienced attorney, right? And so if you go anywhere and just think of any industry, it works the same way. So now that brings that over to real estate. And you're, like you said, the experienced agent, the one that's going to get the job done. Right. And consumers will have the option to choose who they want to go with. That's how it's going to work. And so it's not going to bottom line, I think I'm going to leave it with this. It's not going to upend the industry. It's not going to turn everything upside down. There are going to be some changes. We don't know what that's going to look like, but I can tell you that sellers are going to be represented and buyers are going to be represented. Yep. That's the way it's going to be. We don't know exactly the details, but that's to be left to say. It's going to be up to the consumer, I think. So.
I think so too. Yeah, it's going to definitely change the market and the way it works. But there's no guru out there that's going to be able to tell you exactly how this is going to affect everything. At the end of the day, I think it is going to make it better for the consumer. It's just going to be figuring out how that looks better for the consumer so that we don't leave people behind. We don't leave people in a world where they don't feel like they can buy. And us as agents, we need to focus on solutions, right? So the difference between an experienced agent and a non-experienced agent is a good experienced agent is going to take this, like every other change that's happened in real estate before, and they're going to figure out how to make it work and focus on a solution versus focusing on the fact that the sky's falling and that there's no way to fix this, or that people are going to lose jobs, or this or that. Really, it's how do we take this and make it a win-win for everybody? And that's what we want the takeaway to be: is don't focus on what the news is telling you, because like already, they're going to focus on what's going to sell news. Focus on, okay, what's the issue here, and how can we fix this, or how can we make it work so that me as the one-off person buying can buy, or how does it work where me as the seller can sell?
Yeah. And of course, in the media, you're going to have those attention-grabbing headlines all the time, right? And buying a house is already scary as enough. And it's one of your biggest investments. If you're a young couple, it is the biggest investment probably to date, right? And so it is a very scary situation. And you want to go in there with make sure that you are protected, that you're cautious on what you're buying, right? And the only way that you can do it is by talking to someone who's in the business day in, day out, and making sure that you're doing it. In fact, speaking of the news, I saw another headline, another equally scary headline, and it says that buying a home right now is more expensive than renting. And in the article, it kind of suggests perhaps you should rent in the meantime Now, of course, that's a national news headline, right? And every market is different. So we want to talk about what that would look like here in Houston. Now, if it were true that buying a house is more expensive than renting, then you would say, well, I want to go ahead and rent for the next 5 years. But what would that look like in terms of losing appreciation if you buy a house? In Houston, the average appreciation is about 5%. Now, let's say if you save $300 a month in rent. That's about $3,600 a year that you saved up because you didn't buy a house. The average house price in Houston is about $350,000. So if we're talking 5% appreciation, you're talking $15,000 in appreciation per year. So you saved $3,000, but you lost $15,000 on the back end in appreciation. You do that in year two, you saved another $7,200 in renting versus buying, but then you missed out on another $10,000 to $15,000. Now you're losing out $30,000 in equity appreciation. So you really have to look at your situation and say, well, what is it that you want? Now we're just talking about tangibles. Let's talk about the intangibles. Buying a house, that's your home that you get to do with whatever you want. You want to paint, you want to change the fixtures, you want to upgrade the flooring. That's what you can do. Whereas if you're renting, you can't do that unless you have the landlord's permission. Then you run the risk of the landlord saying, hey, I'm not renewing your lease. You have to move out. It's going to cost you money to new deposit for the new place. Movers, we're talking another $5,000, $6,000 in costs so that you can move out.
Yep.
So in reality, when you see those headlines and you're thinking, hey, I should probably rent, talk to someone and go over the entire situation, what that looks like. Not just saying, what is going to cost me now? What am I saving now if I rent? Versus what if I buy, and what would that look like with everything in consideration? Your lifestyle, the appreciation that you're going to gain from buying a house, and going through those things and see if that makes sense. And again, talking about appreciation, you wait, that $350 house today is not going to be it's not going to be selling for $350,000 in year two or year three. It's going to be selling for a lot more. Either way, you're going to pay more. So if it makes sense for you, if you have the down payment, you have the credit score, and you have a need to why to move, it's a serious consideration. Definitely talk to your real estate agent and to your loan officer.
Yeah, I think it's an analysis thing, right? Which most of the time, when you're trying to decide whether to rent or buy, you're not running the analysis. So it may be $300 less, to rent than it is to own, right? And it might be the best choice for you, depending on what your finances look like. But things that you got to look at is it's cheaper on a short-term monthly basis, right? You save $300 for that month, right? But how much of that money that you put into the rent is left for you? Zero. You get 0% return on the money that you're putting into rent, right? So it's not cheaper typically. I'm sure there's scenarios where it is. It's not cheaper when it comes to a return on your money invested, right? So whether you're paying for a house or you're paying for rent, you got to pay for both, no matter what. Which one is going to return a higher amount at the end of the day when you're moving out? When you're moving out of an apartment or a house that you're renting, you're getting zero return at that moment. It might actually cost you money. You're getting negative return because you're having to pay to move for the moving truck, days off of work. If things are damaged, you don't get your deposit back. And then on top of that, you probably got to put another deposit on the next place. So really, there's negative return on renting versus when you own, as long as you're not underwater and you purchased right, because you were represented right, and you were put into a good situation, then you should have a higher return on the money you've put into the property. So you got to be able to analyze it in that sense too. And not only that, let's just say none of that mattered. Okay, well, let's say you're saving $300 a month on rent. What are you doing with that $300? If that $300 is not being invested or saved or put towards something that's going to give you a return on that $300, you're just buying more junk, then really there's no point in saving that $300 when it's not going towards something that's positive.
Yeah, you know what? And of course, we're talking local real estate. We're talking the Houston market. Mm-hmm. It might be different in another market, in other markets, in other states. We're talking how Houston, we're still lucky that we have houses that are still affordable. We know what the national headlines is doing. So
Yeah.
always consider what the local real estate market is doing when it comes to making a decision like this. So consider local real estate market analysis versus just what the national news is telling you. You mentioned something I think we want to end up with, but you mentioned savings and and if you're saving that money and you're putting it away. You have a banking background, right? You came from a bank, and recently I saw a headline where money market accounts are paying 5% interest. Now, 5, 10 years ago, that probably would have been a great return if you park your money in something as safe as a money market account and it yielded 5%, right? So what do you think about those interest rates in a money market account?
So it just,
Versus, I'm sorry,
go ahead.
versus applying that to somewhere else, investing that money somewhere else, like in real estate.
So it depends. Everything's analysis, right? And you got to make sure you're talking to the right people. If and it's your risk profile too, right? So every time you get into an investment, especially big investment firms, they have to do a risk profile on you to make sure that they're putting you into things that match with that, right? That's part of their due diligence. So if you're typically when you're younger, you take more risks, right? So you can put it into something that's higher risk, higher reward. Money market accounts with a guaranteed 5% interest rate are going to be accounts that you put your money into just as a safe guaranteed return, right? 5% when you really look at it is not that much. Over the long term, it is. So they call it the snowball effect, right? So I was thinking about interest rates the other day and what kind of returns you get. And I was watching a video it was someone from the Dave Ramsey show. And when they do their analysis for people, when people say, I make this much and I make that much and I want to get this return and should I do this, should I do that? They were telling people, if you put this much away for this amount of time, this is what you'll end up with. And what I found interesting is 5 years ago to 10 years ago, when you were watching shows like that, they were telling people based on like a 5-6% return, how much they would have in 20, 30 years. Now they're advising people based on a 10-11% return. They're saying if you put this much money away at 11% return, like that's kind of what's expected now is 11% return to be a good return to make it worth putting your money somewhere. You're going to get this much in 3 years. If you over that time you put in 300,000, you walk away with 3 million, right? And then they say let's just play it safe and say you only get 10% return. So the fact that they're out there saying 10% return is a safe return tells you a little something, because before that was an amazing return. Before, if you got 10, you were beating everybody. Now, if you're getting 5, you're kind of lagging behind. You're probably barely keeping up with inflation.
You're barely keeping up with inflation at that point. You might be breaking even or perhaps even losing depending on the year. You might be even losing money on that. And so I wanted to compare that. Of course, we're real estate guys right now. Now you're a real estate guy and we're real estate guys now. Of course, we're always going to say, hey, why don't you consider real estate as an investment, as an alternative to putting it into a money market account? And putting it real briefly, let's say that you find you have $50,000 and you can either put it in a 5% money market account or invest it in a $200,000 house, $50,000 down payment. What would that look like? Well, your mortgage payment would probably be around $1,500. You could easily lease out that house between $1,800 to $2,000. Let's go with the higher end, $2,000. So you're cash flowing $500 a month. That's $6,000 per year. So you already made $6,000 on your $50,000 investment, right? On top of that, as we know, Houston is appreciating at a 5% annually. So that $200,000 in year 2 is going to be worth what? Another $10K. Another $10,000. Another $10,000. $10,000. So you've already with your $50,000 investment, you've already made $10,000 plus $6,000 in cash flow. Not to mention what the tenant has paid down in rent, but let's not worry about that. Let's just worry about the $16,000 that you made on paper and in cash flow. That's $16,000 with your $50,000 investment. At a 5% money market account, if you park your money there, 5%, $50,000 would have yielded you $2,500. So there's a huge difference. Of course, you mentioned it. Risk tolerance is important. It's renting real estate or being a landlord is not a passive income. You have to put some work in there.
Yep.
But the returns are there. If you play it smartly, if you talk to someone knowledgeable, can give you the ins and outs of everything else, it is a more profitable way to go if it's right for you, if you have the risk tolerance and you have the ability to manage it properly. So just wanted to throw it out there. Any last words before we go?
No, I would just say for anyone watching, if you have any questions, I don't know if you have a way of seeing what they ask here, feel free to throw your questions in there, and we can maybe for the next minute or two just answer whatever people throw out there. And if you don't, then we'll see you another day.
Yeah, definitely. If you have questions, so if you're not watching it live, if you have questions, drop it in there. We always take a look at it back, and we address those questions in the next week. So if you have any questions, if not now, if you're not watching it live, drop a question or comments and figure out anything that we talked about. Do you agree or disagree with anything that we talked about? We like to have a discussion about what's going on. Again, the more we talk about this, the more clarity we bring to the situation. And so there's a lot of news out there. There's a lot of misconceptions. There's a lot of truth out there, but we just have to find it. And we do that in talking about it and figuring out what people are thinking out there, people who are not in the industry, what headlines are trying to sell, all those things. There's truth out there. We're in the business day in, day out. So we have a different perspective, and we want to make sure that we bring it to you guys. So
I think what's also important is for everyone to know that we don't think we know everything.
no,
I think that's part of being a great agent is we're willing to listen to the people we serve, and we're willing to have that open communication, right? And for anyone out there, if you have a question or you say something we said was wrong, that's fine. We'll look into it. We'll figure it out. We might bring it up on the next episode, and we're gonna take everything day by day because we're problem solvers. We don't attack people. We attack the problem, and I think that's part of being a great agent is you're always solution oriented.
you're always learning. We're always, what's the newest change? And just like in any other industry, there's a lot of changes that are happening, not just with this, but with every other, anything else that happens. We're always learning about what the industry is how the industry is changing. How can we adapt? How can we better serve our clients? I mean, that's just what we're here for. Again, there's a lot of information out there. Real estate is so broad, and there's so many aspects to it that there's constantly something new, some new loan products, some new insurance can affect how you purchase real estate. There's lots of different things. We're always on the verge of reading, knowing exactly what we're doing. So that's what our job is. We want to make sure we have the right information and we bring it to you. And if we don't know it, we're going to tell you we don't know. But guess what? We're going to find out. And we'll get you the answer. So, all right, guys. Nice talking to you guys. All right. I'll see you.
Take care. Have a great Friday.